Hey, my name is Owen Reeves. I'm 33 years old. I build and repair houses for a living. And 3 weeks after I bought the little white house at 14, Cottonwood Lane, a woman knocked on the door at 9 o'clock at night in a rainstorm and told me she had left something inside. She was soaked through. Her hair was stuck to her cheek. Her coat was too thin for October in Vermont, and she held the strap of a canvas bag with both hands like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Behind her, the rain came off the porch roof in a sheet. I opened the door wider so the light from the hallway fell on her. "Can I help you?" She looked at the door frame instead of at me, at the brass number plate, at the place where the paint had worn thin from 1,000 hands pushing it open. She looked at that house the way people look at a face they used to love. Then she said it, and her voice was so quiet I almost lost it under the rain. "I left something inside." I didn't know her name yet. I didn't know a county deputy had carried her out of that house 23 days earlier. I only knew she had walked through a storm to ask for something, and that whoever had made her stand there apologizing on her own porch had done something wrong. But let me take you back a few weeks, to the morning I first stood in front of that house, because none of this makes sense until you understand what I bought and why. I grew up in Marlow, Vermont, population 4,000 and change. My father was a carpenter, and so was his father. My dad used to say a house tells you everything about the people who lived in it if you take the trim off and listen. I don't think that's just something old men say anymore. He died 2 years ago, in February, of a heart attack in the cab of his truck outside a lumberyard in Rutland. He was 61. I was on a job 40 minutes away, hanging a door, and my phone was in my jacket on a sawhorse, and I didn't hear it ring. After that, things came apart the way things do. Rachel and I had been engaged 11 months. 6 months after the funeral, she told me, very kindly, that she felt like she was living with a man who had gone somewhere and left his body behind to be polite. She wasn't wrong. So by 33, I was living in 2 rooms above my own workshop, eating dinner standing up, working 6 days a week, telling anyone who asked that I was doing great. I had savings because I never spent anything. Then in September, the county posted the foreclosure list, and 14 Cottonwood Lane was on it. I knew the house. Everybody in Marlow did. A white farmhouse from around 1910 at the end of a dirt lane, for acres behind it. A wraparound porch with a swing on chains. When I was a kid, that porch had a light on every night, a small warm square you could see from the county road, and my father used to nod at it and say, "Ruth's still up." Ruth Bennett. She taught 3rd grade in Marlow for 31 years. She taught me. She kept a coffee can of sharpened pencils on her desk and never once made a kid feel stupid for needing one. Widowed young, raised her son alone, buried him, then raised her granddaughter. She died in March at 84. And 6 months later, her house was on the courthouse steps with a starting bid of $31,000. That number is what made me go. Not greed. Something closer to insult. A house like that does not go for $31,000 unless something has gone badly wrong upstream of the paperwork. The auction was on a Tuesday morning. 9 people came, and only 2 of us bid. The other one wore a charcoal suit and looked at his phone between bids like the whole thing was an inconvenience. His name was Preston Vance, and he had an office over the pharmacy with gold lettering that said Vance Estate and Elder Services. He went to 42,000. I went to 46. He looked up from his phone for the first time, the way you look at a dog that has gotten onto the furniture, then shook his head at the auctioneer and walked out before it was finished. $46,000 was almost everything I had. I got the keys in a paper envelope with a rubber band around it, and I drove out to Cottonwood Lane and sat in the truck at the end of the drive a long time before I could make myself get out. The house was rough, but not ruined. The porch sagged where a post had rotted out. There was water under the bathroom, and somebody had pulled the kitchen apart and never put it back. But the bones were beautiful. Chestnut floors under 3 layers of vinyl. There was still furniture in it. That's the part one wasn't ready for. A couch with a quilt folded over the arm. Cups in the drainer. A calendar still turned to March with a doctor's appointment written in blue ink, in handwriting so careful it looked like a teacher's, because it was. And on the wall going up the stairs, a pencil line every few inches with a name and a date. Nora, age 4. Nora, age 7. Nora, 9. all the way up to Nora, 17, and then nothing. I stood on those stairs for a long time with my hand flat against the wall. I started work the next morning and worked alone for 3 weeks. I tore out the bathroom. Sister 2 Joyce rebuilt the porch post. I boxed up what was in the house and wrote on every box and marker. It felt wrong to throw it out and wrong to keep it. And on the 23rd night, in the rain, she knocked. I left something inside, she said. I said, okay, coming out of that. She didn't move. You don't know who I am. You're Nora, I said. You're on the stairs. Her head came up then. She had gray-green eyes, and there were 3 days of no sleep under them. And something went across her face that I can only describe as a small animal deciding whether it was safe to come closer. The pencil marks, I said. I haven't painted over them. I wasn't going to. Her mouth moved, and nothing came out, and then she stepped inside. I got her a towel and put the kettle on, because it was the only useful thing I could think to do. She stood in the middle of that kitchen, dripping on the subfloor, turning in a slow circle. The window over the sink was covered in plastic sheeting. You took the sink out, she said. It was cracked underneath. It was rotting the cabinet. She stood right there for 40 years. I know, I said. I'm putting a soapstone one back in the same spot. Same height. There's a wear mark on the floor where she stood. I'm not moving it. Nora put her hand over her mouth and turned away from me, and I busied myself with the kettle and gave her the 90 seconds she needed. When she could talk again, she told me. Nora Bennett, 29, raised in that house from the age of 4 after her mother left. Evicted on the 28th of September by a deputy who apologized twice while he did it. I wasn't squatting, she said quickly before I could ask, and I understood from how fast she said it that she'd had to say it to a lot of people. I live here my whole life. I paid the electric. I didn't know about the mortgage until the notice came. What mortgage? Exactly, she said, and something bitter went through her voice. She owned this house free and clear since 1987. Then in the last year of her life, there was a mortgage for $89,000, and nobody can tell me where a dollar of it went. I sat down on an overturned bucket because there wasn't a chair. Who signed it? She did, or her power of attorney did. Preston Vance. The name landed in my chest like a drop tool. Charcoal suit, I said. Bid against me. Quit at 42. Nora went very still. He bid. He bid. She laughed. It was not a good laugh. Of course he wanted it. He's been after this land for 2 years. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. He was her attorney. He came to the house. He brought her groceries once. She thought he was being kind. I said, carefully, Nora, what did you leave inside? She dropped her hands. A box, she said. Wooden. About this big. She showed me with her hands, the size of a bread loaf. It was my grandmother's. When they came, I had 4 minutes to take what I could carry, and I panicked, and I took the photo albums and her ring and left the box, and I've been sick about it since. What's in it? Letters, she said. That's all. Letters she wrote me. And I believed her because it was true. What neither of us knew yet was that it wasn't all that was in it. We looked that night. The closets, the back of the pantry, the hollow under the stair landing. Nothing. She got quieter as we went, and at one point she said, without any anger, "You must think I'm ridiculous. Coming here at 9 at night for a box of paper." "No," I said. "I think you came to your house." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said goodnight and went out into the rain, and I watched her get into an old blue Corolla at the end of the lane and sit there in the dark without starting it, her head back against the seat. I went inside. I came back out with a thermos, and I walked down the lane in the rain and tapped the window. She rolled it down about 3 inches. "You're not driving anywhere tonight," I said. "I'm Phoenix. There's a duffel bag on your back seat and a pillow. You're sleeping in this car." Her jaw set. "I'm not taking anything from you." "Good," I said. "Then take it from the house. There's a room upstairs I finished last week. There's a bed in it and a lock on the door, and I'll sleep in the truck. It's 41 degrees, Nora." She stared straight ahead through the windshield for a long time. "Why?" she said finally. And I told her the truth, which was probably a mistake, or maybe it was the only right thing I did that whole month. "Because my father used to nod at your grandmother's porch light every time we drove past." I said, "And say, 'Ruth's still up.'" I bought a house with a light in it. I'd like it to still be a house with a light in it. She turned the key, but not to drive, just to shut off the electrical. Then she took her bag and walked past me toward the porch, and halfway there she stopped and said, without turning around, "The letters aren't why I'm here." I figured. "Then why did you let me look?" "Because you'll tell me when you're ready," I said. "And it's not my business until then." She went in. She was up before me. When I came in at 6:30, the plastic sheeting was taped better than I'd taped it. Coffee was made in a camp percolator she'd found in one of my boxes, and Nora was crouched in the front room with her hand flat against the baseboard. "The wall's not right," she said. "Good morning." "Owen." She looked up. "The wall's not right. This room is 11 feet wide. The room above it is 11 feet 8. I stopped with the coffee halfway to my mouth. That's the thing nobody tells you about old houses. They keep their secrets in the arithmetic. We spent that morning measuring every room, and the numbers were fine everywhere except the front room, where 8 inches had gone missing behind the plaster on the chimney side. I didn't open it that day, partly because you don't take a chase apart when you don't know what's behind it, partly because I'd worked out that when the box turned up, Nora would have no reason to stay. So instead I made her an offer over the coffee. "I need help," I said. "That's not charity, that's true. This house needs 8 months of work, and I'm one man. You know where the well line runs. You know which windows swell. You know what this house looked like when it was right. Work with me." She said no. She said no on Wednesday, no on Thursday, and on Friday, she came out at 7 in the morning in her grandmother's canvas barn coat and said, "I get paid weekly and the room comes out of my wages," and that was the whole negotiation. I found out over the next few weeks what her life actually was. She'd left Marlowe at 22 for accounts work in Albany, then Syracuse. Then Ruth started forgetting things, the stove, the names of streets, once the way home from church, and Nora quit her job and came back and cared for her 18 months. Alone. And she was not there when Ruth died. It took her 3 weeks to tell me. One Tuesday in March, the hospice nurse said it would likely be several more days. So Nora drove to Rutland for the propane account and the pharmacy and the bank and stopped for a sandwich because she hadn't eaten since the day before. Her grandmother died at 3:40 while she sat in a parking lot. She told me that standing in the doorway of the pantry with a scraper in her hand, in the flattest voice I have ever heard from a person. I put down what I was holding. "Nora, don't," she said. "Don't say it wasn't my fault. Everybody says that. It doesn't reach." I wasn't going to say that. I wiped my hands on my jeans. I was going to say my dad died in a lumberyard parking lot while I was hanging a door 40 minutes away, and I've run that morning back 400 times looking for the version where I hear the phone ring. She didn't move. "It doesn't reach," I said. "I know, but I'm here on the other side of it, so at least you're not standing there by yourself." She didn't say anything. Neither did I. We just stood there in a half-torn-out pantry with the wind coming through the plastic, and after a while she went back to scraping, and I went back to work, and something in that house shifted about a 1/4 inch, and neither of us said a word. The trouble started the following week, and it started at Delaney's Diner on Main. Nora had picked up 3-night shifts a week there since the eviction. On Thursday, I stopped in around 8 for pie, which I told myself was about the pie. Preston Vance was in the corner booth with 2 men in fleece vests and a set of rolled drawings on the table. I watched him watch her carry a tray past. Then he said, at a volume that carried to every seat in that room, "Nora Bennett, I hear you found somewhere to land. Out at the Cottonwood place with a new owner. That's very modern of you." The diner went quiet the way a room does when everybody wants to hear the next part and nobody wants to be seen listening. Nora's shoulders came up. She kept walking. "Because I'll tell you," Vance went on, to his table, but for the room, "my concern was always for Ruth. A woman that age, that confused, and a granddaughter who's away 7 years and comes back the moment there's property involved. I have never been a man who stands up in restaurants. But there is a specific feeling that comes over you when you watch someone take a person's worst private grief and hold it up in front of a room for entertainment, and I stood up before I had decided anything. I walked over to the booth. The 2 fleece vests looked at me. Vance looked at me last, and slowly, which I think was supposed to mean something. "Mr. Reeves," he said. "The carpenter." "That's right." You paid 46 for that property. He smiled. I hope you've had the well tested. I'd like you to say the rest of that to her face, I said, or not at all. I'm having conversation with my associates. You're having a conversation with the room. I put one hand flat on the table. Ruth Bennett taught me to read. I sat in the third row, and I've been in every square foot of that house for a month, and I want you to know what I found. 17 years of pencil marks on a stairway wall. A calendar with her granddaughter's handwriting on every doctor's appointment for a year and a half. A chair pulled up beside a bed. Somebody moved downstairs so an old woman wouldn't have to climb. I let it sit. The house told me a different story than the one you're selling. And the house was there. Nobody said anything. Behind the counter, Marge Delaney had stopped pouring mid-cup. Vance's face didn't change much, but his hand did. It went to the roll drawings and squared them against the table edge twice. You're going to want to be careful, he said quietly, and it wasn't for the room anymore. Title work in this county is a very fragile thing. Then it's a good thing I've got nothing to hide, I said, and I went back to my seat and ate the rest of my pie, and I don't remember a single bite of it. Nora didn't speak to me on the drive home. Not one word for 11 minutes. When I pulled up at the house, she sat with her hand on the door handle and finally said, "You shouldn't have done that." Probably not. He'll come after you now. He was already coming after me. He bid 42 on a house he'd have gotten for 31 if I'd stayed home. I turned the truck off. Nora, he wants those 4 acres. Why? She was quiet. The state's rebuilding the Route 9 interchange, she said. 2 miles east. Everything from there to the county road goes commercial eventually, and one parcel in the middle of it never sold because a third-grade teacher wouldn't sell it. Her 4 acres is the only piece that fronts the road. I sat with that. $89,000 mortgage, I said slowly, on a house that's paid off. Money nobody can find. Default. Foreclosure. Bought at auction for 31. For 31, she agreed. That's not a loan. That's a way of moving a deed. I know, she said. I've known since June. But knowing and proving are different countries, and I don't have the money to get from one to the other. 2 nights later, somebody broke into the house. We weren't there. Nora had a shift, and I'd driven to Keene for Clabbard. When I came back at 10, the back door stood open. The jamb splintered where the strike plate had been kicked through. Not robbed. Gone through. Drawers on the floor. The chimney wall opened in 3 places with a bar. Nora came in behind me and made a sound I hope never to hear again. Nothing was taken. My tools were still there. $200 in cash and a coffee can on the windowsill was still there. They were looking, she said, for the box. He knows it exists. She was shaking. Owen, he knows it exists, which means he knows what's in it, which means she told him, or he saw it, or he's afraid of what might be in it, I said, which is the same thing. Deputy Carl Hensley took the report the next morning and stood in that front room alone while looking at the 3 holes in the plaster. Nora, he said, when I served that paper in September, that was the worst day I've had in this uniform. I take it kindly if you'd let me know what turns up, officially or otherwise. That was the first time I let myself think we might not be doing this alone. We opened the front room wall on the 1st of November at 9 at night with a work light on a tripod and both of us on our knees. 8 inches. That's what the math said. 8 inches of dead space behind the chimney chase, boxed in with lath and plastered over so long ago the keys had gone brittle. I scored the perimeter, worked a flat bar in and lifted, and the panel came away in one piece. Behind it, there was a shelf. A shelf. Somebody had built a little shelf in there on purpose 100 years ago, or 50, and turned it into a place where a family kept things it wasn't ready to lose. There was a tin of buttons, a child's shoe, a folded flag in a triangle case, a packet of letters from 1943 tied with string, and a wooden box about the size of a bread loaf with a brass hasp and Nora burned into the lid in careful, uneven letters like someone had done it with a soldering iron at a kitchen table. Nora didn't touch it for a long time. She sat back on her heels with her hands in her lap and just looked at it. She hid it, she said. She hid it, and then she forgot she hid it, and she couldn't tell me, and I thought her voice cracked clean in half. I thought it was gone. I thought that was one more thing I'd lost. It's not gone, I said. Open it. She opened it. There were 19 letters, all addressed to Nora in that careful teacher's hand, all dated. The earliest from 1999, when Nora was 2 and her mother had left her at that house and not come back. Ruth had written her granddaughter a letter every year or two for 24 years and never given her one. Nora read 3 of them out loud and couldn't get through the 4th. The one from 2016 said she was proud of her for leaving, because staying would have been the easier kind of love and going was the braver kind. The one from 2021 said she'd started forgetting words, and would Nora please remember the woman who taught her to tie her shoes on the bottom step. And the last one, dated the 9th of February, 3 weeks before she died, in handwriting gone shaky and large. My girl, a man came here about the papers again. I signed something. I don't remember what. Your grandfather always said, keep the deed with the letters. It is under the letters. The house is yours. Nora looked up at me. I lifted the stack of letters out of the box. Underneath, flat against the bottom, there was a folded document with a blue backer and a smaller envelope, and a spiral notebook about 4 inches wide. The document was the original warranty deed to 14 Cottonwood Lane, Ruth Ellen Bennett, recorded in 1987. The envelope held a notary's receipt dated the 6th of February and a signed, stamped statement in Ruth Bennett's hand saying she had signed papers at her kitchen table for Mr. Preston Vance on the 14th of January, which she believed to be a Medicaid application, that she had not read them, that no one else was present, and that she did not intend to borrow against her home and never had. And the notebook. The notebook was the thing that finished him. A grocery notebook, dates and single lines because she was losing her days. Tuesday, P. Vance came, brought milk, wanted signatures, told him I'd wait for Nora. Friday, took pills at 8, he came at 9, don't remember the middle of it. 14 entries. For months. All in her hand. Nora sat on the floor of that torn open room, holding her grandmother's notebook, and started to cry the way people do when they've been holding it since March. Not loudly. The other way. The way where the body finally puts down what it's been carrying. I sat down on the floor next to her, close enough that our shoulders touched, and I did not say one single word because there was nothing to say that was better than being there. After a long time, she wiped her face with the back of her wrist and said, I wasn't there when she died. I know. But she was writing to me the whole time. She looked at the letters spread out around her knees. 24 years. She was talking to me the whole time, and I never heard a word of it until tonight. You heard it, I said. You just heard it in the shape of a person instead of on paper. She turned her head and looked at me. The work light was behind her, and I couldn't see her face very well, which is maybe why she said it. I don't want to leave this house. Then don't. That's not what I mean, and I think you know it's not. The furnace kicked on somewhere under us. Outside, the wind moved the pines at the top of the lane. Say what you mean, I said. I mean, I've been terrified for 3 weeks, she said, not of losing the house, of the day you finish it. You'll finish it and it'll be beautiful, and then you'll sell it because that's your job, and I'll have to leave here a second time. She stopped, and I don't know how to want a house and a person at the same time without it sounding like I'm using one to get the other. I reached over and took her hand, and her fingers were cold and covered in plaster dust as she gripped mine hard enough to hurt. I bought this house in September, I said, and I have not once looked up what it's worth. Not once. I've been building a kitchen around to wear a mark on a floor. Ask yourself who does that. Owen. I'm not finishing it to sell it. I stopped planning to sell it around the 2nd week, and I've been lying to myself about why since. I looked at her. It's you. It's been you since you stood in the rain and apologized for existing on your own porch. She kissed me. She leaned in over her grandmother's letters with her hand still in mine and kissed me. And I remember thinking the whole house had gone quiet, which of course it hadn't, and that I'd remember the smell of plaster dust and old paper for the rest of my life. I have. When she pulled back, she said, whispering, I came here for a box. I know. I'm not going to be able to leave now. I know, I said. That was the plan. We photographed everything that night on 2 phones, and I drove to Brattleboro the next morning and put the originals in a safe deposit box because I had seen what a splintered door frame looks like. Then we got a lawyer, Adiz and Becky, an office in a converted house in Bellows Falls. She read the notebook twice without saying anything. Then she said, "Ms. Bennett, do you understand what you're holding?" "I think so." "You're holding a contemporaneous record in the decedent's own hand." She set it down very carefully, the way you'd set down a bird. "I have practiced elder law for 19 years. I have never had one of these." Here is what came out over the next 5 months, plainly, because the paperwork of it is dull and the shape of it is not. Preston Vance held a power of attorney over Ruth Bennett dated the 14th of January, notarized by a woman whose log book, subpoenaed, had no entry for that date. On the 22nd, he executed an $89,000 mortgage from a lender LLC whose registered agent shared his office suite. The money went into a client trust account and out again in 4 transfers, 2 of them to an entity called Cottonwood Holdings, which held the Whitfield lot, the orchard, and the parcels behind the church. No payment was ever made on that mortgage. Not one. Default was declared in June, 3 months after Ruth died, and the foreclosure went fast because the only person who would have contested it didn't know it existed. And Ruth Bennett had a documented diagnosis of moderate vascular dementia entered into her chart at Dartmouth 10 weeks before she signed anything. And then the thing that turned a civil case into something with teeth. Walter Pike, 88, of Chester, Vermont. Same template, same notary, same lender, 11 months earlier, except Walter Pike had no granddaughter and had died in a facility in Claremont, and nobody ever asked a question. The hearing was on the 14th of April in the Windham County Courthouse, in a room with radiators that clanked and windows that didn't quite close. Nora wore her grandmother's coat over a blue dress. Deputy Hensley came in uniform on his day off. Marge Delaney closed the diner for the morning on a Wednesday and came with 4 regulars. By the time the judge came in, that room was 3/4 full of Marlowe. Judge Eleanor Hastings was in her 60s, half glasses, absolutely no patience. Vance's attorney went first, and he was good. Ruth Bennett had been a competent adult who made a decision her family didn't like. The diagnosis was preliminary. The granddaughter had been gone 7 years and came back when there was property at stake. Then Adee stood up. She had the notary testify. June Alvarez, retired to Florida, flown back and visibly furious, who said under oath she had never met Ruth Bennett, never notarized anything for Vance that January, and that the stamp wasn't hers, because hers had a defect in the outer ring. She put in the medical records. She put in the bank transfers and walked the court through $89,000 going in a circle and landing in an entity that owned 4 adjoining parcels. She put in the Walter Pike file, and then she read the notebook. She read it out loud, entry by entry. The one about the milk, the one about the pills, and the last from the 12th of February. He says it is all taken care of. I don't know what it is. I'm going to write to Nora tonight while I still have the words. The radiators clanked. Nobody moved. Vance's attorney asked for a recess. He didn't get one. Judge Hastings took 11 days. The power of attorney was void, procured by fraud, and executed by a person lacking capacity. The mortgage was void. The foreclosure was set aside. Vance was ordered to disgorge, and the matter was referred to the Attorney General and to disciplinary counsel, with a paragraph about Walter Pike I wouldn't want written about me. And then a paragraph about me I hadn't expected, finding that Owen Reeves was a bona fide purchaser without notice, that his title was not impeached, and that he was to be made whole out of the disgorgement, which meant, in plain English, that the house was legally mine and nobody could take it from me, and I could have kept it. We were on the porch when Adee's called with the decision. Last week of April, the light coming in low and yellow across a field that was still mostly mud, doing that thing April light does where it makes you believe things. I hung up and told Nora all of it, including the last part. She sat down on the top step. "So it's yours," she said. "It's mine. Free and clear. Free and clear." She nodded a few times, fast, looking out at the road. "That's good. That's actually good, because if it had gone back into the estate, there'd be another 18 months of..." And then she stopped because she'd run out of the ability to be reasonable about it. I sat down next to her on the step. "Nora, I'm Phoenix." "You're not," and that's allowed. I waited until she looked up. I've had the deed drawn up for 6 weeks. Joint tenancy. Both names. Bennett and Reeves. It's been in a D's drawer since March. I didn't file it because I didn't want you signing it while you were scared. She stared at me. You can say no, I said. It doesn't change anything about you living here. I'm not trading you a house for a life. I want the paperwork to say what's already true, which is that this is your house, and I'm the one who got to fix it. Owen, her voice had gone to almost nothing. Do you understand what you're giving away? Yeah, I said. Half of the second best thing I've ever gotten out of this deal. She laughed and cried at the same time, and then she leaned into my shoulder and stayed there while the light went from yellow to gray to blue. We were married in September on the 4 acres, a year and 4 days after I bought the house. It was small. Adiz came. Hensley came in a suit nobody had ever seen. Marge closed the diner again and brought all the pie. Nora wore her grandmother's ring, the one she'd grabbed in her 4 minutes, and came down the porch steps past all 17 pencil marks, which I had cut out as one intact section of plaster and framed and hung in the front hall. Preston Vance surrendered his license in the fall and was indicted in the spring. Walter Pike's niece in Ohio got a call from a state's attorney and, I'm told, cried on the phone for 11 minutes. That part matters to me more than the rest of it. The house is finished now, mostly the way a 100-year-old house is ever finished. Soapstone sink over the wear mark in the floor. Chestnut sanded and oiled, not stained, because Nora said her grandmother would have called staining chestnut a crime. I built the little shelf back into the front room wall behind a panel with a proper catch, and there's a wooden box on it with Nora burned into the lid and 20 letters inside now instead of 19. Our daughter was born in June. We named her Ruth. She is loud, and she does not sleep, and she has her mother's gray-green eyes. And last week I caught myself at the bottom of the stairs with a pencil in my hand, doing the math on how long until there's a first mark on that wall. And every night, without either of us ever deciding it, one of us turns on the porch light before we go up. A while back, we were sitting out there after dark, Ruth asleep against Nora's shoulder, the light on over us, and the whole valley black beyond the end of the lane, and a truck went by out on the county road, slow, the way people drive when they're looking at something. Nora watched it go. Then she said quietly, somebody's driving past right now telling their kid, that's the Reeves place, they've still got their light on. Probably. She was quiet for a second. I stood out there in the rain, she said, and told a stranger I'd left something inside. I looked over at her. You did. I've thought about it 100 times, she said. Elite. I knew that box was gone. I'd looked for it 3 weeks before I ever knocked. The porch light caught the side of her face. I came because the light was on and I couldn't stand that somebody else was in there. I said the first thing that would get the door open. I sat with that for a while, with my wife under a light my father used to nod at, holding a baby named for a 3rd-grade teacher who wrote letters nobody read for 24 years and still, somehow, got heard. Well, I said, you weren't lying? No. No, I said, you did leave something inside. It just took us a year to find out it was you.